The first ring came just after midnight, slicing through the silence of her apartment like a blade. Elena stirred from the couch, where she had dozed off with a book in her lap. The sound wasn't unusual. Wrong numbers happened. Telemarketers sometimes slip through the filters, but there was something unnatural about this one. It was the way the tone lingered, sharp, as though vibrating against her ribs rather than through the air. She reached for the receiver with hesitation she could not explain. When she lifted it to her ear, there was no voice, only a distortion, as if someone far away were breathing through a broken machine. She almost hung up, but then she heard it, a faint whisper threaded inside the static, a single word, her name. Elena froze. The connection snapped, replaced by silence, so heavy it seemed to bend the room around her. She set the phone back, heart pounding, telling herself it was nothing more than a prank. Yet the air carried a strange weight, as if her walls themselves had heard. Elena lived alone in a small town surrounded by mountains, a place where people clung to old habits. Everyone knew each other, and they knew her, the quiet woman who worked nights at the library, who rarely stayed long in conversations, who was polite but distant. She had grown used to solitude, to the rhythm of empty evenings and silent mornings. Yet tonight, that silence no longer comforted her. It pressed against her skin, reminding her that she had been called by name by someone she did not know. By 1 a.m, she convinced herself it was nothing. She returned to her couch, switched on the small lamp, and tried to focus on her book. The words blurred. The phone rang again. Her throat tightened. Slowly, she reached for it. This time the static was clearer, like a hiss from deep underground. The same voice emerged, metallic, broken, and yet intimate. "We are watching." Her blood went cold. Before she could respond, the call ended. No number appeared on her screen. She checked the log, no record of incoming calls. The unease spread deeper, turning into a cold awareness that something beyond prank or accident was unfolding. She tried to sleep, but her dreams were sharp and disjointed. She saw flashing lights, corridors of metal humming with electricity, shadows stretching across concrete floors. A sense of being pursued clung to her. She awoke at dawn with sweat on her forehead and the sound of faint breathing still ringing in her ears. The next day she worked in the library as though nothing had happened, but her mind wandered. She found herself staring at the phone in her bag, waiting for it to ring again. When the old clock struck noon, the device vibrated. She stepped outside, heart hammering, and answered. This time, words came clearly, though warped with static. "You have to listen." They buried it. The coordinates: 47 degrees north, 121 degrees west. Truth is in the dark. Elena repeated the numbers to herself, terrified she would forget. Before she could ask who it was, the call dropped. She typed the coordinates into her phone. The map pointed to a location deep in the mountains, far from any road, marked only by forest and stone. Her stomach knotted. What was buried there, and why call her? She did not speak of it to anyone. Who could she trust? The town was quiet but not innocent. She had grown up hearing stories of strange lights, of people who went missing only to return days later with no memory. She had dismissed those tales as rural superstition. Now, she wasn't sure. That night, she could not sleep. The phone sat on the table like a living thing, its dark screen reflecting her face. At 2 a.m, it rang once more. This time she did not hesitate. She answered. The voice came faster, urgent, words tumbling through static. "They are not gone. They wait beneath. Do not trust the lights. You are the key." The line cracked, a shriek of digital noise ripping through her skull. She dropped the phone, clutching her head. When she picked it up, the call had vanished again, leaving no trace. She sat in the darkness, trembling. Questions clawed at her. Who were they? Why her? What lay beneath the mountains? She wanted to dismiss it as madness, yet the coordinates remained, burned into her thoughts. The more she tried to resist, the stronger the pull became. By the third day, she decided to investigate. Curiosity gnawed at her until it overpowered fear. She researched the coordinates, digging through old archives in the library's basement. Most records gave nothing. But then she found a reference in an old government report, buried in a folder labeled Project Echo. The document was fragmented, water-damaged, but she managed to piece together fragments. Experimental communications array, anomalous frequencies, containment breach suspected. Her pulse quickened. Whatever lay hidden in those mountains had once belonged to the government. Something dangerous, now abandoned, yet somehow still reaching out through a telephone line. She copied the coordinates into a notebook, folded it carefully, and slid it into her pocket. She told herself she was doing this for answers, but in her chest she knew it was something deeper. She had been chosen. The calls were not random. The following night, when the phone rang again, the voice was no longer distant. It was right beside her ear, as though someone stood in the room whispering, "We are coming." The mountains loomed like silent guardians as Elena drove through winding roads that seemed older than memory itself. The town fell away behind her, swallowed by mist and distance, leaving only the long stretch of asphalt and the heavy pulse of her thoughts. She had not told anyone where she was going. How could she? Who would believe her if she spoke of phantom calls, coordinates whispered in static, or government files buried in dusty archives? The air grew colder the higher she climbed, and the world seemed to narrow until it was just her, the car, and the shadows. The map app on her phone lost signal an hour before she reached the point where the road ended. Beyond lay nothing but dense trees and an old trail, half devoured by roots. She stepped out into the chill, her breath visible in the thinning light. The silence was absolute, but it was not peace. It was a silence that listened back. She should have turned around, but the notebook in her pocket felt like a weight dragging her forward. The coordinates were burned into her mind, as though they had always been there. The trail wound upward, every step crunching dead leaves. At times, she thought she heard another set of footsteps just behind her, pausing when she did, resuming when she moved. She stopped once, holding her breath, but when she spun around there was only forest, endless trunks crowding the dim light. Yet the feeling of being observed clung tighter with every step. She pressed on until the trees opened into a clearing, and there, half hidden under moss and rust, she saw it. A fence of bent metal, broken in places, surrounding what looked like an old concrete entrance buried into the hillside. The coordinates matched perfectly. This was it, the forgotten facility. The gate hung crookedly, its padlock snapped long ago. She slipped through, the metal shrieking at her touch. The air grew colder as she approached the entrance, a rectangular slab of steel sunk into the earth. Letters had once been painted across it, but only fragments remained. Proj. Echo. A thrill of dread ran down her spine. She pushed, and the door gave way with a groan that echoed like a warning across the clearing. Inside, the darkness swallowed her immediately. The beam of her flashlight trembled across walls of rusting metal and peeling paint. Water dripped somewhere in the distance, steady as a heartbeat. She took cautious steps forward, her light revealing corridors that stretched deeper than they should have. This place felt abandoned, but not empty. The air hummed faintly, as though machines deep underground still dreamed. The first room she entered was lined with desks and old computers, their screens shattered, their casings gnawed by time. Papers lay scattered across the floor, words smudged and ruined. But one folder remained intact, sealed in plastic, left as if deliberately placed. She opened it, and her heart raced. Typed lines described experiments in signal capture and dimensional frequency testing. One entry, dated decades ago, spoke of voice phenomena recorded on civilian telephone lines. The margin contained a single handwritten note, "Do not answer after midnight." Her hand shook as she dropped the folder. It confirmed everything. Her calls were not accidents. They were fragments of whatever these people had unleashed. The phone was not just a device, it was a doorway. She pressed deeper into the labyrinth of corridors. The deeper she went, the stronger the sense of being watched became. Shadows seemed thicker, clinging at the edges of her light, retreating only when she focused on them. Once, she thought she glimpsed a figure standing at the far end of a hallway, tall and thin, head bent unnaturally low. She blinked, and it was gone, leaving only the echo of dripping water. Rooms branched off the main hall, each one a snapshot of abandonment, a dormitory with beds overturned, a cafeteria with trays still set as though waiting for people who never returned. The strangest was a control room filled with machines that, impossibly, still hummed faintly. Lights flickered across cracked panels, forming patterns too deliberate to be random. She moved closer, and for a moment, she thought she heard voices layered within the static of the speakers. Not one voice, but many, overlapping, whispering fragments of her own thoughts. She staggered back, heart hammering. The voices grew louder, filling the room until it felt as if the air itself was vibrating. Then suddenly silence. She realized her phone was vibrating in her pocket. She pulled it out with trembling hands. The screen was blank, no number displayed, but the call was active. She lifted it to her ear, and the words she heard froze her in place. "You should not have come here." Her mouth went dry. "Who are you?" she whispered. The response came, layered, as if spoken by 100 mouths at once. "We are what remains. We are the ones who wait beneath." The connection dissolved into a scream of static, so piercing she dropped the device. When she picked it up, the call had ended. She shoved the phone away and turned to leave, but the corridor behind her had changed. Where she had walked minutes ago was no longer a hallway, but a wall of smooth concrete, seamless and solid. Panic clawed at her throat. She spun in the other direction and forced herself deeper, her only path forward. The air grew heavier, pressing down on her chest, until each breath felt like a struggle. At last she stumbled into a massive chamber that dwarfed the rooms before. The floor was etched with lines of metal, forming a great circular pattern like an antenna or a seal. At its center stood a tower of machinery, blackened with age yet pulsing faintly with light. Wires spread from it like veins, sinking into the concrete. Around the circle lay remnants of old equipment, broken monitors, reels of tape, recording devices all pointed inward as though capturing something that had once stood there. Her flashlight flickered. She smacked it, but the beam sputtered, revealing only fragments at a time. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw shapes moving just outside the circle of her light. Too tall, too thin, limbs bending wrong. When she blinked, they were gone, leaving only the low hum of the machine. On a nearby console lay another file, this one stamped classified in red. She opened it, eyes darting across the words. Project Echo. Initial success in establishing contact across dimensions. Unidentified entities responding via civilian lines. Communication stable. Phase 2 initiated. The next page was scarred with ink and water damage, but fragments remained. Entities hostile. Breach risk escalating. Termination protocol failed. Her chest tightened. The calls weren't a warning. They were an invasion. And she had been chosen not by accident, but because something had marked her as a channel, a human link to their prison. The final page bore one chilling line in handwriting so frantic the pen tore the paper. Do not answer. They know your name. Elena's legs trembled as she stumbled backward from the console, the words searing into her mind like brands. They knew her name. They had called her from the dark not because she was strong or chosen, but because she had answered. Every warning she had ignored now loomed like a curse she could not escape. The chamber felt alive around her, the humming of the machinery rising until it sounded like 1,000 insects swarming inside her skull. Her flashlight died completely, plunging her into blackness, so thick it felt like a substance pressing against her skin. The only light came from the faint pulse of the tower, a cold rhythm like the beat of a heart that was not human. She moved closer, compelled by something she could not resist, as if invisible strings had latched to her chest and dragged her toward the circle. Her phone vibrated again. She pulled it out with shaking fingers. The screen glowed white, no number, only a single word in sharp black letters, answer. She wanted to throw it away, but her hand betrayed her. She pressed the button, lifted it to her ear, and the chamber fell utterly silent. What came through was not a voice but a chorus, layered and fractured, voices of men and women, old and young, overlapping into a single presence that shook the marrow of her bones. "You are here," it said, not as a statement but as a triumph. "The door is weak. You are the key." Her throat constricted. "Why me?" The voices laughed, an awful sound like glass grinding against metal. "Because you listened. Because you are human. Imperfect. Fragile. Resistant to silence. We needed one who would not ignore the call." A sudden vision burst across her mind. She saw soldiers in uniforms, decades ago, standing in this very chamber, their faces pale as they heard the first whispers through the machines. She saw the experiments spiral out of control, scientists screaming as the air twisted, as shadows stepped from the walls and bent them into shapes no body should take. She saw a vast expanse beyond this world, a realm of black light and endless hunger, where voices dripped like oil and eyes without lids turned to watch. And she saw them reach outward, clawing through dimensions, searching for a crack. She staggered, clutching her skull. The voices pressed harder, commanding, "Release us. Speak the words. Join the signal." The machinery whined, metal straining, sparks shooting across the chamber. The circle on the floor glowed faintly, the veins of metal heating like arteries. Shadows slithered along the edges of her vision, gathering substance, stretching taller, sharper. Her phone grew hot in her hand, the screen pulsing with each word. Say yes. She wanted to collapse, to give in, to let the voices flood through her and end the torment. But another voice whispered from deep inside her, her own voice, fragile yet defiant. No. This was not her fate. She was not their vessel. She forced herself to look at the console again. Among the broken panels and burned-out switches, one lever remained intact, painted bright red, its label almost gone but legible enough. Manual override. Her breath caught. A human safeguard, hidden but still here? The voices shrieked the moment she saw it, as if they could sense her intention. The chamber shook violently. The walls bled with cracks of light that revealed nothing behind them but endless darkness. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall, bent, arms stretching like tendrils. Its head swiveled, revealing no face, only a mouth stretched ear to ear, filled with teeth that shifted like sand. It moved toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Her instinct screamed to run, but the only way out was through. She bolted for the console, every step like running through molasses. The creature lunged, its limbs scraping against the floor with a sound like knives dragged across bone. She slammed against the console, grabbed the lever, and pulled with all her strength. The effect was immediate. The chamber roared as though the mountain itself cried out. The circle blazed with white fire, lines of metal searing against the floor. The creature screamed, a sound that tore at her ears, dissolving into smoke as the light carved through it. The voices erupted in fury, filling her head with a storm of curses and promises. "We will find you. We will never stop. You are ours." She clung to the lever, refusing to let go even as heat blistered her skin. The machinery shuddered, sparks raining like fiery snow. Then, with a thunderous crack, the tower imploded inward, collapsing in a flash of light, so bright she thought she had gone blind. She was thrown backward, slammed into the floor, her breath knocked from her chest. When she opened her eyes, silence filled the chamber. The light had gone. The hum was gone. Only dust drifted through the air like ashes. The circle on the floor was blackened, charred into the concrete as though burned by something not of this world. The console was destroyed, the lever melted into slag. Her phone lay shattered beside her, its screen split into a spiderweb of glass. She picked it up, but it was dead. No glow, no sound. Just plastic and silence. For a moment, relief washed over her. She had done it. She had severed the signal, locked the door, silenced the voices. But as she staggered to her feet, an uneasy truth gnawed at her. The facility was collapsing. Cracks split the walls, dust raining from the ceiling. She stumbled through corridors that seemed to rearrange themselves, every turn unfamiliar, yet driven by instinct. She found her way back to the rusted entrance. She burst into the open air just as the ground trembled and the hillside groaned, swallowing the structure into itself. Trees shook, birds scattered, and then there was only stillness, as though the mountain had buried the secret once again. Elena collapsed in the clearing, the cold earth against her face, her lungs burning as she gulped fresh air. She laughed once, hollow and broken, because she had survived. She had faced the abyss and chosen to remain human. Yet even as dawn painted the sky with pale light, she knew survival was not victory. In the days that followed, she returned to her apartment, tried to resume the rhythm of her life. But silence was no longer silence. Every time her phone buzzed with a message, her heart lurched. Every time she passed a payphone on the street, she swore she heard it ring, though no one else reacted. She dreamed of voices still whispering, promising that doors never stay closed forever. On the seventh night, as she sat in her darkened apartment, the phone on her table vibrated. Her blood froze. She had destroyed it. She had watched it shatter. Yet there it was, glowing faintly, alive again. The screen displayed a single word in perfect clarity: hello. Her breath caught. She stared at it, unable to move, unable to look away. The ring-tone began, slow at first, then louder, echoing through the room, rattling the windows. She reached for it against her will, her hand trembling. The moment before her fingers touched, the ringing stopped. The phone went dark. She waited, heart hammering. Silence returned, but it was not peace. It was a silence that listened. Somewhere, deep in the mountains or deeper still, the voices were waiting. And she knew they would call again. Elena thought leaving the mountain would close the chapter, but what lingered followed her like a shadow stitched into her bones. Days bled into nights, nights into days, yet every second she felt the same tension in the air, as though the world itself leaned closer, listening. The phone she had destroyed returned on the seventh night, and since then it never fully left. She hid it inside drawers, buried it beneath clothes, even smashed it again with a hammer, but somehow it always reappeared, whole, on her table, glowing faintly. It didn't ring every night, but when it did, she could feel the pressure in her skull before the sound reached her ears, as though the call began inside her head. She stopped answering, stopped speaking, yet the messages changed. They no longer asked her to answer. They simply told her things. Things no one should know. Names of strangers who died hours later in distant cities. Coordinates of places where accidents unfolded minutes after she received them. Entire sentences describing tragedies before they happened. At first, she thought it was coincidence until she saw the news one morning, and the details matched word for word. She smashed the television, but the phone continued. Paranoia wrapped around her life like barbed wire. Sleep abandoned her. Food lost its taste. She disconnected her landline, shut off her internet, even threw her SIM card into the river, yet still the phone remained. The glow of its screen in the darkened room became a reminder. The voices had not been silenced. They had only shifted, found another crack. She realized then the tower had not been a prison but a doorway, and she had been the one to unlock it further, even in her defiance. One evening, while the sun dipped below the skyline and the streets outside her apartment buzzed faintly with traffic, the phone vibrated again. She ignored it, clutching her knees, rocking herself against the wall like a cornered animal. But the vibration did not stop. It continued, steady, relentless, for an entire hour. Finally, driven by rage more than fear, she snatched it and screamed into the speaker. "What do you want from me?" The answer was instantaneous, cold, and certain. To listen. Her blood ran cold. It was not a command. It was a statement of purpose. They wanted her not only to hear them, but to carry them. A vessel not of possession, but of witness. A human antenna. After that, the messages grew darker. She began to hear not just words, but sounds. Snippets of screams, crashes, wails of things that could not be human. She recorded one once, desperate to prove she wasn't losing her mind, but when she played it back the file was nothing but static. Yet when she held the phone to her ear again, the screams returned, raw and real. Soon, she wasn't the only one affected. Neighbors began to vanish from her building. A child went missing from the apartment 2 floors above. His mother tore through the halls in hysterics until the police came. The elderly man across the hall was found dead in his bed, his face twisted in horror, eyes wide open as though he had seen something unspeakable in the dark. The officers carried his body away, but Elena noticed the faint shape of a phone clutched in his rigid hand. She couldn't breathe. It spread. That was the realization that clawed through her one night as she stared at the device. Whatever had infected her had begun to seep outward, carried through the very wires of the city, pulling others into its web. She was not the only receiver anymore. The voices were multiplying. She tried to warn people, but her words sounded insane. Don't answer unknown numbers. Don't pick up when the phone rings at night. People laughed or looked at her with pity, assuming grief had broken her mind. But she could see it in their faces later. Those who had listened even once carried the same shadows under their eyes, the same hollow gaze of sleeplessness. The infection of sound was spreading invisibly. The breaking point came when she fled the city. She packed what little she could, left the phone behind, and boarded a train. For hours she felt almost free, the countryside rushing past the window, the hum of the tracks soothing her nerves. She even allowed herself to close her eyes. But when she woke, her heart froze. The phone sat on the tray before her, screen glowing. No one had placed it there. It had simply appeared. The screen displayed new words. You cannot leave. Her scream startled passengers, but when she showed them the phone, the screen was blank, lifeless. They looked at her with suspicion, unease, whispering among themselves. By the time the train reached the next station, she stepped off into the dark night and vanished into the crowd, abandoning the journey. She understood then that this was not something she could run from. It would follow until the end. In her solitude, she began to listen differently. Not as a victim, but as an observer. She wrote the messages down, filled notebooks with the details the voices revealed. Names, dates, places. The more she wrote, the more she saw a pattern. It wasn't random. The tragedies connected like threads of a vast web, converging toward something. Every call, every whisper pointed to an approaching event, a convergence. They were preparing, and she was their chronicler, chosen because she had picked up when no one else had. The truth became unbearable one night as she pieced together the final notes. The voices were not merely warning of disasters. They were orchestrating them. The accidents, the deaths, the disappearances, none were random. Each was a sacrifice, each a signal, like pounding on a wall to weaken it. They were breaking through, not all at once, but piece by piece, and humanity's tragedies were the toll required. Elena realized she was no longer resisting but participating. Every time she wrote, every time she acknowledged the message, she gave it permanence, gave it weight in the world. Her notebooks became their scripture, and her mind, their altar. She tried to burn the journals once, but the fire refused to catch. Pages dampened with something slick, oily, that did not exist before. When she touched it, the residue clung to her fingers and smelled of rot. She dropped the matches, trembling. The words could not be erased. The phone buzzed again, louder than ever, rattling the table. This time, when she lifted it, there was no voice, no chorus. Only silence. She whispered into it, almost pleading, "What are you?" The silence stretched until it broke with a single response, one that froze her blood. "We are you." The call ended. The phone went dark. And Elena understood the horror more deeply than ever. The voices were not outsiders invading. They were the echo of humanity's own hidden frequencies, its own darkness, amplified and reflected back. The abyss was not calling from beyond. It was rising from within.